So if you want to innovate, if you want to make improvements, how do we actually process the information that we're getting in, and how do we improve these processes? So if I'm getting, so think of every single number that you use to make judgments. Where did those numbers come from? Things like sunk cost fallacies. So how much have we already spent on something? How should that determine how much we'll spend on it in the future? So Carl was giving me the example of, I think it's Brandenburg Airport, which has had massive sort of cost overruns and so on. So it's an interesting one in terms of those types of things. Planning fallacies. So when people are processing information about the future, we tend to be over-optimistic about what we can do in the future. So there's things like slack discounting, all of these biases that would suggest that when we're processing information about future innovation, we will tend to be overly optimistic. So again, overconfidence being another feature of these types of things. And conservatism, so the tendency to think that if it's worked in the past, or if it's something that we've done in the past, we should continue doing it in the future. Okay, and then how do we evaluate? So in terms of in our own decision making, how do we evaluate whether something had worked? So Carl gave a lot of formal mechanisms for doing that. But today is really about like what sort of behavioural biases might creep in to those processes, and how might we overcome them. So these sort of clear ones. So if you've embedded some innovation process, or if you've been in charge of some innovation process, or if you've delegated some innovation process, there's a tendency to overestimate the extent it was got to do with one person. So you know, if it was a success, we say that, you know, the person who designed it was brilliant. If it was a failure, the person who designed it was really bad. This can stifle innovation, because in many cases outcomes are a very complex function of the person and the environment and all of the other things that are involved in it. Hindsight bias is another one. So that, you know, this worked or this didn't work. Well, we knew that all along. And again, Carl is pointing to experiments as being one potential way to overcome this. I'm going to talk about other ones afterwards, but I think this is really important for innovation. If somebody wants to try something new and it doesn't work, do they end up becoming the really bad person in the organization? Even though in advance everyone agreed it was the right thing to do, or at least we have objective criteria for doing it. How do you encourage people to innovate? And I think that is actually one of the big barriers to innovation from a psychological perspective, the feeling that if it doesn't go right, you know, everyone's going to blame me, and everyone's going to believe that, well, I knew all along this wasn't going to work. That person was wrong. So how do you give people a sort of psychological safety to pursue an innovation, and as I said, to give, you know, feedback afterwards that doesn't stigmatize the person. Okay, so that was just a starter. So I guess what I'd like you to think about is what is the sort of culture of innovation in the organization? What types of innovations are you interested in pursuing? Is it a culture that promotes these? What might be the role of psychological biases in doing that, in helping this? Are there areas of high potential? So are there areas where you're thinking about introducing innovation across the organization, particularly stuff that will require staff buy-in, and we'll talk about that afterwards. And what sort of problems would you be interested in addressing in this framework? And what might be the gains of doing this? So are there particular areas that, you know, we really would like to get improvements in? And what might be the particular barriers? So as I said, I'm not setting a hugely ambitious target for this. I think if we can get 3 or 4, and I've already, as I said, got some of my own in mind, but again, anchoring, I don't want to anchor you. I'd be more interested in what your own ones would be. So if Rowan is there, if you're happy to tell people what to do. So I think you've got the rather ambitious target of 7 minutes to come up with.
Yeah, I think what we'll do. So there's going to be 3 sort of sections in the presentation.